Hey, what's up everybody? This is Muse24, and today I'm going to take a look at the Moon Knight series from a couple years back. This was written by Brian Michael Bendis, and was actually sort of a precursor to the Age of Ultron stuff. This takes place in the 616 Marvel Universe, whereas Age of Ultron takes place in an alternate version of 616. I forget the actual universe number, but it starts off leading you to believe that it was 616, and then stuff happens and they reveal that it's actually an alternate version of that universe. But in this, there are direct ties to Ultron and the build-up into Age of Ultron, which I very much appreciated. And that's actually sort of the reason that I got this. I remember reading one of the first issues of this Moon Knight run on, I think, my phone's Marvel Comics app, or maybe it was a free comic book day tie-in or something like that, quite a while back, where I read that first issue and thought, wow, that's really cool. I have never read a whole lot of Moon Knight. I've read a couple issues here and there, just kind of random entries, nothing tied to one another. But he always seemed like an interesting character because he's sort of like a Marvel equivalent to Batman to a certain degree, except for a lot smaller budget. Like, Mark Spector has lots of gadgets that he can use, but he's in the LA area in this comic book run, and while he is living his day life as a film producer, a TV series producer rather, and he does seem to be well off with money. Obviously he's got nowhere near the cash that someone like Bruce Wayne or Tony Stark would have in their bank. And it's nice to see him in an area that is not as densely populated with other superheroes. I feel like with some of the Marvel stuff, when they go to New York City or somewhere like that, and like the east side of the country, there's so many heroes there that it's like, well, we're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel for villains to fight. So with this, I appreciate the fact that it's a little bit more contained to Moon Knight and his allies as well as his enemies, and that this sort of playing field that they have in this urban environment does well for his abilities, his sort of weird visions of other superheroes talking to him, because that's a thing that, as I understand, is pretty common in the Moon Knight series that I've read, at least, where Mark Spector is schizophrenic to some degree, at least, where he's talking to people who are not actually there, but they're giving him advice on how to handle his next tactics or how to take on different villains and all that. In this case, it is Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Captain America that he's constantly interacting with. In other versions, it's just one character. I think there's somewhere he's like talking directly to Khonshu, the Egyptian god who granted him his superhero status to begin with, and that's what his whole TV series is actually about, is he's adapting his own history in becoming Moon Knight and dealing with these Egyptian myths and magic and all that into sort of a soap opera action show thing. The cover art here I absolutely love. This is some of my favorite cover art on any of the comics that I own right now, which I know might not be a huge deal to some people, but I think it looks really cool just, up on my shelf or whatever. You might also notice here, looking at the spines, this is the first volume, and this is the second volume. The second volume is considerably smaller than the first, and it's not necessarily less dense in content, it's just that these first issues are a lot more meaty. They do collect about the same number of issues. This one's 1 through 7, and this one is 8 through 12. So actually, I guess that the second one is a little bit shorter. I was thinking it was closer to like 13 or 14 that ended it. Anyways, this was much like Venom, sort of a limited run that they were, granted to go into an ongoing series with if it did well enough. Apparently it didn't sell well enough for them to really want to do that at the time, but I still really enjoyed it, and I think it does a sufficient job of delivering the story in the way that it needs to, in the time frame that it has. It definitely deals with a smaller scale sort of crime ring and this local kingpin to the LA area, who does have some superpowers of his own that they do a good job of keeping sort of secret until later in the story. These are both rated T+, and they definitely feel like the higher end of the T+ age rating. Not that there's a lot of gore in them, and not that there's a lot of foul language, but there are some more adult situations that they deal with. It's a lot smarter in the way that it deals with Mark Spector's abilities and his tech and all that, and the relationships that he has with the few very close contacts that he does have. Also, some of the villains that they deal with are Again, a little bit more small time, but at the same time, they do a good job of rounding them out for this story. And I definitely appreciate that. It's a lot like the Venom series in that regard, that they want to keep things in perspective, and I appreciate that. Mark Spector himself is very entertaining with the way that he takes to these different situations, and he's, on the one hand, I think a little bit more cautious than some other heroes. He wants to be prepared for every encounter. He wants to make sure that his tech is up to snuff and all that. But at the same time, he has to improvise at certain points. He has to make do with what he's got on the scene. And that's very unusual for, I think, a character that doesn't really have as much in the way of superpowers to succeed as much at. Because that's Moon Knight's whole shtick, is that his abilities come mostly from his tech, his weaponry that he has on hand, his smarts, and his ability to outdo his different foes, given his knowledge of the environment, and given his history as the Moon Knight in, policing this area and all that jazz. So to that end, I definitely appreciate that it's a little bit different than the typical Marvel superhero routine. It's a little bit like Iron Man in that regard, that he's got to rely on his tech, he's got to make sure it's the best it can be. But like I said, on a much smaller budget and a little bit smaller environment scale there. But as a single, limited storyline here, I really enjoyed this. If you're in it for the Moon Knight story and just the standalone tale here, I think you're going to really enjoy that. Like I said, I haven't read a ton of Moon Knight, so I can't really properly gauge where it falls in terms of quality compared to other Moon Knight series. But as its own thing, I think this is really solid. And for me, Brian Michael Bendis' writing is kind of hit or miss. I enjoyed Age of Ultron, I enjoyed this. There's a couple other things that he's written, like Secret War, that I really enjoyed, and then other things that I wasn't quite as hot on. And it's not necessarily, I don't think, that he's at fault for not writing these well, but I think sometimes it's like his style doesn't work for every character, and that's okay. But at the same time, like I definitely appreciated how much care went into taking on this sort of scope and this sort of more tactical approach to policing this area, as well as making Mark Spector both a grounded hero and sort of a wild card at times. So that was very much appreciated from me as a reader. If you are reading this for the sort of tie-in to Age of Ultron that I mentioned, it's there a bit. I appreciated it for the fact that I'd read Age of Ultron first, and I had read the one single issue that I mentioned in this, and I knew that there were some connections there. But it's not a huge reveal of like, oh, there's this Ultron that was, going to rise up in the background of everything, like behind the scenes, and he's going to initiate the revival of proper Ultron and taking over the world. Like, that's not what actually happens. It's just a little sort of nod to, okay, we're doing the Age of Ultron thing in the future. And I actually think at the end of the second volume, they do a sort of James Bond thing, like they did at the end of, what was it, Skyfall or whatever, like James Bond will return in the next film. They do something like that at the end of here where it's like Moon Knight will return in Age of Ultron. So I assume they did that in a couple other series. Maybe they did it in like Black Widow or Iron Man or Captain America, like all the other characters who are big in Age of Ultron. They may have done something similar in their own storylines. But yeah, like I said, I very highly recommend this series. I thought it was a great read, a lot of fun, but also a little bit more serious and grounded than some of the other Marvel stuff I've read recently. So that's pretty much it for this review, and with that, I will see you guys next time.